the end, to the conclusions. So, if I wrap up about the books that I mentioned, and there are more studies which are influenced by them, but these are, I think, the most important ones. What do they have in common? And what I think that is, they first reduce the Holocaust to the murder campaign and not to other aspects. Right? The focus on this, that is the Holocaust, as we have seen. Then, because it's the murder, it's mass murder, they claim that it had no special, extraordinary characteristics and dimensions. And then, consequently, blurring it into larger schemes of murder. And what I think is that when this is done, the nature of anti-Semitism in general, and Nazi anti-Semitism in particular, becomes unimportant. It is another ethnic or social hatred, like so many others, that cause mass violence and mass murder or genocide. So that is, when I read that definition or this description by Bloxham and Moses about before about the relations between the Holocaust and genocide, then they say later on whether similarities between the Holocaust and other genocides are more significant than differences is ultimately a political and philosophical rather than a historical question. Uniqueness, as often mentioned, is not a category for historical research, it is a religious or metaphysical category. Right? So, and what I try to say is it's precisely the opposite. Right? Unique, the term unique and uniqueness is often used by historians. I have now, from the moment that I started to argue with these things, I have now a collection of historians using the term unique and uniqueness in the meaning, and you can look it up in the Oxford, you're now in Oxford, so the Oxford Dictionary, that unique is something which stands alone, but often it is, and that is the most common way of using the term, is that it's extraordinary. It is something which is not very usual. Right? Of course, an historical event is always composed of human actions, and human actions are repeated in different situations. But when we talk about an historical event, we are speaking about a cluster of acts, right, that sometimes can be extraordinary, not according to recurring patterns and so on. That is what we then call unique. So I've found so many cases where people speak about Hitler being unique, or perhaps the rescue action in Chambon in France, where a whole village hid Jews, a Protestant village, hiding Jews for about 2 years. Right? It's called unique, and so uniqueness is there. So uniqueness is a term. I wouldn't say it's a category, but it's a term used by historians, while saying the opposite, there is the political correctness of saying, well, all the murders are the same. That is right? But that's not an historical explanation, it's a moral attitude. And so here I would like to go back to the special dimensions of anti-Semitism in general, and in the case of the Holocaust in particular, right? When we read before this description of the atmosphere in which they worked by Dieter Wislitzeni, I'll read it there. The world is directed by forces of good and evil. According to this view, the principle of evil was embodied in the Jews. Right? And it can be compared only to the money of the witches, the Hexenwahn. And when you think about it, and that is, I think, very important, that there is this this idea of communism being Jewish, capitalism being Jewish, all kinds are kind of theories and ideologies and systems that have the equality of human beings as their basis. They are called Jewish. So when we then speak about anti-Judaism, and the Jews are here standing for the principle of the French Revolution, if we will call it, or the Enlightenment. And therefore, if we read Mein Kampf, if we read documents of the security service, of the SS, if we read letters of ordinary soldiers, right? Judaism is seen as a global threat. And Judaism and the Jews are the only group in the Nazi vocabulary which are called world, das Weltjudentum, world Jewry, international Jewry. Right? The Nazis were criminal, they murdered a lot, they had a lot of enemies and invented enemies and ethnic enemies and so on. But there's only one group that is designated as being global, eternal, whatever, these apocalyptic terms, right? And that has to do with the anti-Judaism, right? The Jews are the HIV-like carriers of a Jewish idea and Jewishness, and Jewishness is not what Jews call Jewishness, what Yiddishkeit, right? But it is the principle of equality, right? Jews are the carriers, and therefore they have to be exorcised from the universe. And that makes the case of the persecution and murder of the Jews during the Holocaust so different from other groups. And therefore, when we look upon it, that the obsession with marking the Jews, because they have to be identified, right? Going back generations, looking back into the Jewish grandfathers and great-grandfathers, and so, if they were Jews. So, if there is a drop of Jewish blood in these person. Another example, the German Language Association, Deutsche Sprachverein, in 1934 embarks on a campaign of de-Judaization of the German language. De-Judaization of the German language. Right? These are not physical Jews in the German language. They are what they call Jewish concepts in the German language. I think you dealt with Carl Schmitt, right? So in 1936 he has a speech to the German Lawyers Association, yes, where about the de-Judaization, yes, of the German legal thinking, not only of lawyers, yes, but thought, German legal thought.
Yes, but you know, it's the same. So what he has in mind is a casuistic influence of the Talmud on the German language. So it's not.
Yeah, but he doesn't know what the Talmud is. Yes, the Talmud for him is, and that goes back to other writers, and you can see that, is this idea which Judaism gave to Christianity, Christianity handed over to liberalism, liberalism to socialism, and so that is the idea of human equality. Right? So, and sometimes it is called Talmudic, or sometimes it's called biblical, or whatever, but that is the idea behind it. So we have to think in another way. Right? And that has to do also with the new moral that they wanted to build up. Right? So, but what's important now also in this context is when we speak about the German Language Association and the Legal Association, that it is not against the Jews, it is a self-purification of Germandom, of German thinking. right? So that is part of the Holocaust, right? Now, what we find, and here scholarship, perpetrator scholarship that we talked about this morning, helped this emphasis by general scholars also. Perpetrator scholarship was eager to find the path leading to the final solution. Right? And therefore we had this linear or zigzag or stepwise ways as I presented them. But there are so many studies that show that there were all kinds of anti-Jewish things and orders and decrees and acts and expressions by ordinary people taken during this period, which did not lead to the final solution. And this case of the ghettos that we talked about this morning, and I showed you, it is not leading to the final solution as such, but it emerged, right? And I can talk also about the Jewish councils that emerged because it was an initiative by a certain group of experts on Jews in the SS, and there are all kinds of anti-Jewish expressions in this period which are not leading to the final solution. So how do we understand that? Right? Now, there is a huge body of research about the decision-making leading to the final solution. These scholars do not integrate all these other expressions of anti-Judaism into their studies because it was not leading to the final solution. But from my perspective, they were there. So what were they? And what I claim is that there is a widespread energy by a lot of people, initiated and then encouraged by Hitler's ascendance to power, but they're all trying now to find a way to solve this vague goal which was set by Hitler already in 1990 in his first political writing, which was not published but it was there in his mind, is total removal of the Jews, Entfernung der Juden überall. So how do you remove everything? And if you go to Iskizeni, how to exercise the spirit, right? Nobody knew exactly. But it was and therefore they have so many initiatives. Those who were more interested in the economic aspects emphasized that, and in legal aspects, they emphasized that and tried to promote that. So you have a lot of directions going into different ways, or you have a lot of initiative going into different directions, right? Which the functionalists try to integrate in zigzag interpretation. But what I see as going to different directions, they all try to contribute to propose something, a way to implement this vague idea of getting rid of Judaism. So some of them failed, some of them collided among themselves, but they were all an attempt within a short period to achieve an apocalyptic goal, right? And from this perspective, if we look upon it, then in the history of anti-Semitism, in the Holocaust there is something which is very extreme, but is different than the criminal approach of the Nazis toward a lot of other groups, gypsies, homosexuals, and so. None of them is a global threat. They are dangerous for the race. They are despisable. They are in the territories that we want to colonize, and so on and so forth. But they are not a threat to the universe as such. And I think this is what is so different in the Holocaust, and why until the very end, at the very end, there was this attempt by the Nazis to achieve this goal, and it is in the last, in the testament of Hitler, just before he commits suicide. It's also, that is relating only to the Jews, right? The war against the Jews is there. So, in the end, what I want to say is that we now find in in the historiography of recent years that the anti-Jewish campaign of the Nazi regime is in a way blurred into a general concept of genocide, right? And then connected also with human rights, and so which is morally okay, but from the historical perspective, it is questionable. Which then, and that is the last thing that I will say now, brings me to a recent report here in Britain on the study on the teaching of the Holocaust in British secondary schools, what we call in state high schools, but in the secondary, right? So in Britain, they started to teach the Holocaust in 1991. And we are now 25 years later, and they carried out a huge study with thousands of pupils in the secondary schools, and what they know about the Holocaust and so on. And one of the interesting findings is that more than 90% of the students knew something about the Holocaust after having learned at high school. But only 30% had heard about anti-Semitism. So there is a Holocaust without anti-Semitism, or for 70%, the Holocaust happened without any anti-Semitic background. Right? So you can see the results of a certain scholarship affecting education, and then later understanding, or popular and understanding. So for us, I think when we are dealing with the history of anti-Semitism and present-day presentations and the role of anti-Semitism in history, in modern history, that there are distortions which affect apparently also political discussions later. And here I'll stop. So we have time for Q&A. Yeah, Eddie.
You mentioned earlier Raoul Hilberg.
Yeah.
I know that Yad Vashem was boycotted in the 16 and 17. Why?
First of all, that's wrong.
No?
No?
That's wrong?
Yeah, wrong.
Okay.
And I told you that I'm at Yad Vashem since 1957, right? And that my father was director. So my father wrote a letter to Hilberg that Hilberg quotes in his memoirs. Right? And Hilberg was a fine scholar, but amazing. His knowledge was really, I met him several times, and he, I would like to have his memory. Right? And of facts and documents and so on. But when he wrote his memories, he wrote his side of the story. So you should read my introduction to the Hebrew edition of Hilberg. And the story is an interesting story, of course. And I'll make a long story short. But one of his supervisors was Friedman, one of the first scholars of the Holocaust, a survivor himself. And he was Polish born. He actually set up the first Jewish Historical Committee after having been liberated in Lvov in 1944, and afterwards moved to the United States. And that was when Hilberg started to work on his study, and he was one of his supervisors and afterwards in the examination committee. and he, and the case was that Hilberg got a prize from Columbia University, where he had written his PhD thesis, to publish the book by Columbia University Press. But Hilberg wanted, expanded his book twice as much as his PhD, and the Columbia University Press didn't want to publish it because the prize was given for the PhD as it was submitted originally. So what Friedman then proposed is that it would be published jointly with Yad Vashem in English, not in Hebrew. In Israeli newspapers, that is always forgotten. And so in 1957, Friedman wrote a letter to Yad Vashem. This is an excellent PhD thesis, and I recommend the publication. And people said, well, Friedman is, Yad Vashem was in its beginnings and had not yet published a comprehensive study of the Holocaust. And he said, okay, Friedman says so, okay. And then the manuscript came in and people started to read. And if you have read Hilberg, Hilberg says, I will not deal with the Jewish aspect of the Holocaust. But then later on he said, he has his evaluations of the Jewish councils and moreover Jewish behavior during the Holocaust, right? Which are often quoted and so on. And then the scholars at Yad Vashem, there weren't too many, but as I told you also this morning, they were the survivor historians, and they were well enraged by what he had written. And Yad Vashem did not want to publish this book. They thought it was a very important book, but Yad Vashem, as an Israeli state institution, didn't want to publish this book as its first comprehensive study of the Holocaust. Right? Now, Hilberg didn't understand this approach of Yad Vashem. So my father wrote this letter to Hilberg, which he kept for decades and published. But and the first time that I met Hilberg was also interesting. It was in 1985, several years after I started my work in the field. And when he saw me, he said, "You are the son of..." Yes. So it was anyway afterwards we became friends also. Together with David Bankir, I initiated the translation of Hilberg into Hebrew. But so Yad Vashem decided that is not a book that we can publish. Right? Now that is the part of the story that people usually have heard about in a distorted way, but it was then the manuscript. Hilberg sent a manuscript to, I forgot, but a quite prestigious American publisher.
It was Princeton.
It was turned down.
Yes, and Hannah Arendt sat there as a committee, and she...
Yeah, and Hannah Arendt was the reader who said it's not an important book. We have Polyakov and Reitlinger. This book doesn't add anything, although afterwards she uses it in...
Yes, he accused her of plagiarism. The New York Times...
Yeah, but later when she wrote about Eichmann in Jerusalem, or the series of articles, she used the book, right? But she was, so that is almost forgotten. It's usually Yad Vashem is the bad guy, and Hannah Arendt not. But, so it has a history, right? So that was actually the reason for turning the book down at that time. But later on, there was in 1968 an initiative by a commercial publisher to publish it, and it didn't do it afterwards. Now, I can tell you, after in 2004, we invited Hilberg to give the closing lecture at the conference that we organized on Holocaust historiography, and then we approached him and asked him also to give his permission to translate it. He was very glad, and he added up new information until he died, right? So until the last moment. But the interesting thing is that I don't think that an Israeli private commercial publisher would ever have published it, because the translation was so costly. I can tell you that it was
600 pages.
no, it's not. It's not 600 pages. It's much
1200
more.
pages.
But it cost us. So you have to check, and there are enormous problems with the translation into Hebrew, because if you know Hilberg's book, he quotes every title of a minor German official anywhere, right? So, and you have these long titles in German, for the, I don't know, Vize-Latrineführer or whatever, the most, and you don't have equivalents in Hebrew. So what do you do with it? And you cannot transcribe it because you have these lengthy German words and so on. So there was a lot of work invested in it, but the actual, the budget, the costs, there's the official cost in the end were about 350,000 shekel.
Wonderful translation.
For the translation, right? And then the hours invested by the late David Bakir, myself, and some of the employees altogether, brings it together to, I think, 600,000 shekel, right? Which is 100, well, that is, nowadays the pound, the British pound is 5.03, so it's 120,000 pounds, right? And there is no private commercial publisher who would ever do it, because you cannot sell it in Israel enough copies. So.
So, question. No, okay.
Yes, I have a question. So, thanks. So if you're exactly right, this is a turning point, right? So the decision to annihilate all Jews, right?
So this is
so here, so this is a turning point, right? So it's not just a,
no, it's an expression of a German soldier in the Eastern Front, because he accepts this attitude, which is much more general, right? We find it among academics.
And this is something new. This is something new, or it's something which you see throughout history. You know, because Hannah Arendt. Sorry.
What do you see throughout history?
No. So Hannah Arendt says so that this is something that was completely new. This is what she called crime against humanity, right? So the ambition to wipe the heirs of one race, right? So I'm just asking if
what is eternal Judaism? What is eternal Judaism? To wipe out eternal Judaism. This is new.
yeah, okay, this is what I'm asking because I'm not sure that this is something new, as Hannah Arendt said, or as I see or as I understand this quotation, right? So in the book by Nuremberg that you mentioned, so it is something that you can trace back. So in this book to Luther. So at some point Luther says, or Luther changes his mind and says that we no longer need the Jews as witness for the revelation of Christ, right? So actually the roles of the Jews in history is simply finished, right? So we no longer need the Jews, and this is also something that in the German scholarship, starting in the 19th century, they introduced this term, Speckjudentum, So it means
Yeah.
Jews that are no longer needed. So they are just
It's in Hegel also. In Hegel you have something.
yes also so they're
And later on in Toynbee also. Leftovers of the past.
yes. So
But that's not the same. That's not the same. If the Jews are fossil of the past, right, or are not needed anymore, it's not the same as exterminating them or getting rid of the idea.
well, they no longer deserve any defense, right? So
But that's not the same.
yes, but so if they're they are
Okay, so
free game.
if you ask the question, that's another lecture of the path leading from kill them not in early Christianity, right? Kill them not because they are the witnesses and so on, and we have to keep them for the future, the end of days, right? The apocalypse, because when the Jews will accept Christianity, then the circle will be round, and so that puts a limit to anti-Judaism. Right? You're not allowed to kill them. There is since the end of the 18th century, you can see a discourse. It starts even with Fichte and others, where this border falls apart. Right? So then there is an option also to kill. But later on, there is the will to kill, right? Which is different. And you definitely know, but I don't know if all of you know the famous or infamous speech by Himmler before in front of senior SS officers in October 1943. It's quite well known, it's online, you can find it. But when he says there, he speaks about the evacuation of the Jews. I'm referring here to the evacuation of the Jews, the extermination of the Jewish people. This is one of the things that is easily said. The Jewish people are going to be exterminated. That's what every party member says. Sure, it's in our program, elimination of the Jews, extermination, it'll be done. And then they all come along, the 80 million worthy Germans, and each one has his own decent Jew. Oh, he wants to save them. Of course, the others are swine, but this one, he's a first-rate Jew. Of all those who talk like that, not one has seen it happen, not one has had to go through with it. Most of you men, that is the SS officers, know what it is like to see 100 corpses side by side, or 500, or 1,000, to have stood fast through this end, except for cases of human weakness, to have stayed decent, that has made us hard. Right? So what is decency in this context? He said decency is another kind of moral, not a moral of humanism, of equality. There is another moral of nature, natural moral, but as he sees it, and that allows for killing. This goes back to Darwinism and so on. But and in this case, the idea and the carriers of the idea that stand up against the principle of nature are the Jews. Right? And this is, I think, so different in this case.
I have a question. I'm persuaded by what you said over here about why anti-Judaism should not be decoupled from the Holocaust. Thank you for that. I'm concerned in the historiography about historiography of Stalin and going too far in the other direction, where Stalin and other regimes that followed Stalinist extermination programs are not paid enough attention to. Is there a way to keep what you're saying without going too far to, you know what I'm talking about, grant special apologies or special explanations for the mass murders of those kinds of regimes?
Well, I think every case has to be studied, and I'm in favor of bringing them forth. Of course, So you have, and in the past when archives in the Soviet Union were not accessible, it was hard to do. I think we have now more options, although since 2 years Putin has put a new restriction on the accession of archives, but the fact that we deal with these issues, and Snyder has contributed to the interest in the Holodomor and the famine in Ukraine, for instance, and in other cases, that I think that is important, right? But you should not conflate everything with everything. So, and coming back to what I quoted from Martin Shaw, intentions are important, and what they lead to, what kind of acts, and it is precisely the political correctness and that brings you to equalize everything, right? And that is not a proper way to deal with history. It's morally okay, but it's not historically, right? So there is a nice quote of, if it's politically correct, it doesn't mean that it is correct. Right? So,
yeah, it's not relevant to this topic, especially in context of anti-Semitism, because Stalin actually assassinated many people, his own people, for a long time,
right.
several dozens of
But
years.
it was also
But he was
anti-Semitism.
but his narrow circle was full of Jews that time.
Right, but
Yeah, only the last wave of purges was against cosmopolitans, against actual Jews. It was a very bad point.
now we are going into Stalinism, and you go also in, or you open a question of Jews who are anti-Jewish, which is also a topic, and there are studies about that, of Jewish self-hatred, as you know. So, history is complicated, right? So,
Not so much.
yeah, well, it is often. So there are definitely also in the in the purges of the 1930s, there's a lot of anti-Semitism under Stalin, and definitely in the last stages, right after World War I, but World War II. So there were Jews who participated in it. Okay, it's part of Jewish history.
You pointed out several times about that Aryans were pure elite.
No, in the original meaning of the term Aryan in Sanskrit.
In Sanskrit, yeah, the first UN Asian.
I don't know Sanskrit, I don't know several words from Sanskrit, but that's what I learned from one.
I just want to emphasize that in the passage of time, claiming to be Aryans was very marginalized. Right now, only Tajiks in former Soviet space are happy when they are named as Aryans. And Pashtuns, which are divided and full of terrorists and so on and so on.
But the decision in Iran to change the name from Persia to Iran has to do with
30, that's right. But I'm saying you that Pashtuns actually claimed simultaneously to be ancestors of Aryans and Jews. It's a confusion after all.
Well, history is full with lunatics. Yeah.
I don't know if there are other hands.
No.
So, I want to come back to my comfort zone right now, because I'm not a Holocaust or genocide studies person. And just three things. One is parenthetical, but I think it's important. We cannot, in my opinion, it is a big mistake right now with Trump, where he is in the United States, to continue to throw out the term political correctness as if it has particular meaning, because it does not. And certainly does not necessarily mean relativism, and it's been deployed quite a lot in a way. I used to do the same thing until I realized this year that that's precisely how in the United States Donald Trump is gaining traction. And since I do have to go back to the United States in the summer, for me it's important, I think for several of us it's very important. So simply throwing the term out now it has backfired on us. So that's one thing to throw out. The second is the undertone of anti-Semitism in terms of programs of study. So again, coming back to this workshop, because this is a crash course in, World War II, it adds to what we know for those who are not experts in the field of world literature and historiography. But there is a question of the anti-Semitism, which is very, very slippery, that you can't put your finger on, but you know that it's there in actual departments. So the question then becomes, what are the different ways in different institutions to respond to that? The third...
It's something that I leave for Charles.
I'm trying out, because we're here for we have different areas of expertise, and I'm not gonna get a new degree in 24 hours. It's interesting that the name Lucy Davidovich didn't come up once today, and some of us know names, some don't, but the one thing, her legacy, will always be the title of her 1957 book, 1957, The War Against the Jews, which summed it up.
1975.
1975, which summed it up. There's a moment in time in which there was no acknowledgement whatsoever. And certainly on the other side of the Atlantic, there's also nothing left. For our generation of young students, there is nothing in their world to suggest anything but lots of genocides take place. It's horrible. Rwanda, Bosnia, South America, the Indians. We have to have something to come back to the classroom with beyond just telling them, except when I say the Jews are unique. Because the response is, well, she's Jewish, so of course that's what she's going to say. And the fourth point I wanted to make was the semantic one of Aryans. And again, speaking from the perspective of a professor in a classroom creating syllabi. In the United States, the whole notion of a white person is very tied to the question of Indo-European languages, philology. I can draw out the name Robert Young for those of you who are familiar with his name. Whiteness and how Aryan Indo-European languages, anthropology, as opposed to anti-white people, was important in the United States Supreme Court. It determined who could be a U.S. citizen or not in 1922 in two particular cases. And that reigned until 1952. And that was a prerequisite to citizenship in the United States. You could only be naturalized as a free white person or as a person of African nativity or African descent. And it's on the vocabulary that the whole court case revolved. In one case, same judge, 1922, one judge determined Ozawa, he had white skin, but obviously he was not what the founders thought white was. He could not be a citizen. Even though he was educated, he had wonderful credentials. Following him came along a man named Finn, who argued. No, I just want to finish this because I think it's important. It may not be important to the lecture today, but it's important to at least have that knowledge out there. Otherwise, we can't talk about where are Jews in the context of the U.S. They're just another white ethnic group. So I'm saying that Indo-Hindu languages, in the case of Finn, he was Indian, he was Hindu. He went to court and argued, I am a white person because I am an Aryan. And the judge, same judge, who threw it out before the exam, said, no, Aryans don't look like pecan-colored people. That's from the case. And so he lost. Armenians, under Franz Boas, who was Jewish, did get to be identified as white because of the testimony of Franz Boas. How do I tie it back then to World War II? Franz Boas is taught very often as simply a German immigrant who founded anthropology. Not as somebody who left Germany because of anti-Semitism. That has to do with the fact that Franz Boas himself did not identify, particularly as Jewish. But if we fast forward to today, and to our classroom today, people like Snyder, who's about to be invited to my college, can be invited without any hesitation, precisely because what's the big deal? So everything which I said before, which seems to be too long and rambling, ties right back into, without the rambling, there's no discussion at Snyder. Why on earth would you object to inviting Snyder to your institution? He's got the credentials and the awards. So if I was going to wrap it all up, I would say, again, my question is, how do we tie all this material back to something that you can find in Hampton, in Texas? You know, it's not the same as in Europe where you can go outside, or in France, you can't walk down the street without a plaque on the wall reminding us, you know, they took away Jewish children here. We don't have that in the US. So that's my.
I don't have
I
much.
don't really, it's not a question, I don't really need an answer, I just would like a variety of feedback.
Okay, so I'm not going to respond. It's also, I think it's a bit, it's another topic and area of discussion. Only one thing I didn't mention, Lucy Davidovich. There are many other scholars that I didn't mention. There are really hundreds of scholars. And Lucy Davidovich was an interesting person. I don't think it's the best book on Holocaust, right? I've written about it, so you can see. It is interesting. It made a change in the mid-1970s. It has to do with the changes in America from the melting pot idea to multiculturalism and so on. So, and after the series Roots, right, comes Holocaust. It's Gerald Green and her book. So there's a lot. That is a different issue, but in hindsight, when we talk about the influence of certain studies on popular understandings and on scholarship, then I think that Lucy Davidovich's book did not leave a huge imprint on scholarship. So, okay, for this yes.
You mentioned in one of your, it's the title section, in recent influential studies, or something like that. Loxham, Snyder,
Mazover.
yeah, and I didn't, a couple of them I weren't familiar with, but one thing they seem to have in common is, to varying degrees on the spectrum, is de-Judaizing the Holocaust. My question is, when we look at contemporary anti-Semitism, does de-Judaizing the Holocaust fall somewhere on the spectrum of contemporary anti-Semitism?
Okay, that's a touchy question. I think for some, not for all of them, I wouldn't generalize. But if you connect what they have written in the book, right, and with other activities and so on, then you can see that it is sometimes connected to anti-Israeli action, and sometimes, not too many, but there are some, that it turns anti-Semitic, right? So the Jews are making too much fuss of their genocide, and there are so many others. So you find it in some cases, but look, if we take Mazower's book, right, and Mazower himself is of Jewish origin. Okay, so it has to do with, we talked about Jewish self-hatred also and so on. This is the book about Hitler's empire, right? Now, the end of the book, there is a chapter, The New Order in World History. And there you find a subchapter, if you, I don't know how good you can see it from there over, the Jewish question from Europe to the Middle East. Right? So what he says that after, as a connection to the Holocaust, that because the murder of the Jews had to do with national tensions and rivalries in Europe, what the Zionists did is transferring this question from Europe to the Middle East. And now we have that European problem in the Middle East. Right? Now you can see that I made all kinds of remarks on this chapter, where he is wrong in his historical knowledge and so on. But if you ask about if it is related to something, it is related with his anti-Israel stance in current political issues. So then you ask yourself, when you go back, why do you, let's say, minimize the Holocaust to the murder in Eastern Europe and don't deal with other things? So you play a game of downplaying, right? That is the question that arises. I didn't mention it in my lecture before, but now you are asking for it. I say there is something in the end. They said it isn't needed for the book at all. Why do you deal with that? And or do you feel the need to speak about this kind of repercussion in the Middle East? Right? It isn't needed for the explanation for a thesis as such. And then you can say, well, these are related to each other. Right? He doesn't want to emphasize the Holocaust too much in this page.
And we have broader context.
I don't think we want to downplay that.
What?
I mean, that should be, what you just pointed out should be pointed out, in my view, if we're looking at contemporary anti-Semitism. Maybe there's a place on the spectrum for innocent anti-Semitism, or unwitting. And I mean, I can think of personal examples of that, where an individual who sounds anti-Semitic would be horrified at the thought of being anti-Semitic. Anyway, that's all.
Okay, then you can.
Quick question. You mentioned Jewish self-hatred. Is that, what term do you think some people are now arguing instead of using the term self-hatred, we should just say Jews who are anti-Semitic or espousing anti-Semitism?
Well, yes, because there are cases, right, where there is an internalization of anti-Jewish perceptions by Jews. So it happened, and it happened in the Soviet Union with the Yevsektia. Also, some people. What? Kaganovich, others. So that, and then you have people who want to distanciate themselves from the perceptions of Jews and Judaism, right? And in order, as often happens, that in order to show that you are okay, you are not like the others, then you are doing even more in this respect. I had a talk with somebody else here about the role of Austrian Nazis in the Nazi system. In Austria, I think it was in Zurich, and often the Austrian Nazis were more extreme than the German Nazis because they wanted to prove themselves real Nazis, right? So you have this phenomenon, if you want eager to show yourself as not belonging to the others, not being as them, or being better, although you are not belonging to the core group, then you emphasize the things that are, or the ideas that are part of the ideology of that group. So therefore, then you find also Jews who are anti-Jewish. So it's part of history.
But there's
Yeah.
something you have to do.
No.
Thank you. I want to bring this thing back home also as conceptual way to do it, and sort of explain a little bit about how I see some of my problems. And that is that the meshing of the Holocaust and anti-Semitism. Let me just throw out, I've written on this, the uniqueness of the Holocaust as one dimension, and it has to be separated from other genocide. We've had problems in the school about can you mix it up with other genocides or not, and how to what extent you do, and how, as you made a quick reference to, or someone made a reference to, you take the Holocaust, it goes to genocide, it goes to human rights, and it totally eliminates a focus on what differentiated the Holocaust. And it's a major issue, and it has to do with funding, it has to do with who's doing the funding, and it's not simple, certainly I've seen it. But I do want to talk about the question of uses and abuses of the Holocaust. And this is something that really troubles me, both in the United States and specifically also in Israel. Let me give you this quickly. Members of Congress. Yeah. Members of Congress refer to abortion as a Holocaust. I mean, it's just nuts. Forget about my feeling about abortion. You have Israeli officers having misused the Holocaust in speeches. You have a prime minister who is waving the flag constantly. It's very detrimental to his own national perception internationally, from my perspective, certainly. Menachem Begin may have had the justification for something that Bibi does not have, and yet he waves the flag consistently. And now let me bring it right home. I'm sure you're familiar with it, if not, let me just recall. There are two journalists in the United States, one for the Forward, one for the Observer, who went out on a limb in the United States and called Trump what he was, or certainly Trump's supporters. And they were inundated with imagery and tweets constantly, pictures of putting their heads into ovens, swastikas, all the hostile imagery that is associated with the Holocaust was patterned directly on their faces and on their work. The fact that you have a candidate who couldn't disassociate himself from those people who are his followers, who are prepared to actually say, that's what we believe, and that's why it was right. And these are some of the conservative. Bethany Mandel is a conservative writer. She's not a liberal. And she got hit in so many different directions. So to me, the problem is that it's the Holocaust imagery, it's the pictures of the Holocaust, and that it's being used, and it's being fanned in such an ugly way. And the incapacity of the American Jewish community and of the international Jewish community to understand the dangers implicit here in perpetuating this kind of anti-Semitism fanned through the Holocaust. And we're going to go back, and that stuff is going to play out. You can take that to the bank, and it's going to be really ugly. And I just spent another week in Israel also. I mean, Israelis don't get it, and the American Jewish community, the segments of the American Jewish community that don't get it, it's very significant.
Well, it's more of an explanation.
I think my concern is I don't want to run with the Holocaust separately from the anti-Semitism, but it's being blended directly now in our own experience at home, and it's extraordinarily troubling.
No, first of all, I agree with that there are a lot of manipulations into all kinds of directions, including regarding animals, slaughter of animals, and so the Holocaust is used for a lot of things. It has to do, of course, with the fact that it became high profile. Right? So when something is high profile, then it is misused for all kind of purposes, because you know that the moment that you mention it, people listen. And I regret it very much, and also in Israel I'm struggling against it, and it's happening. I don't know exactly how you can counter it. It's not so easy, because it's there in the public space, right? So everybody can do it, especially with the social media of today. It goes everywhere. But when you find it, you talked about the United States and Israel. Other forms of manipulation you can find also, of course, in several European countries. So
No question.
it is a general problem. Yeah, as historians also, or as scholars, what we can do is try to correct when we can, when we have the microphone or the newspaper where we can publish it. Yes.
May I ask you, you talk always about this secular approach to the Judaism, to the antisemitism and to the Holocaust. I would like to ask you about the dynamic of the religious approach. So how was the Orthodox people, or most religious people to the Holocaust, because it was a different variation how to evaluate Holocaust from the point of the religion.
In Jewish religion or
Yes.
Jewish theology?
Yes.
It's
And
Jewish.
what is the demand from, what's the position at the moment? So it's,
I would leave it to a personal talk, because that's a huge. Some 20 years ago, I wrote an article about the interpretations of the Holocaust in religious Jewry, not so much among the philosophers, but in, let's say, the ordinary religious people. And there's a whole variety. Professor Patterson has written about as theologians and their reactions. So it's a broad field, and we can talk about it. I think it would take too much here. And it's an enormous field, and there are also manipulations. Right? If you talk about manipulations, but most of them are meta-historical interpretations and going together with traditional structures of religious thought and so on. But it's
According to this question, I think there is a book.
yeah.
There is a book. The author is Jacob Yakov. Authority from Within. There's a book named Authority from Within, Jewish Resistance to Zionism. Authority from Within. Jacob Yakov. He made a lot of write a lot of opinions about the Orthodox Jews, their
Doesn't
ideas
get
of
up on light at this moment, but
Zionism.
maybe later on we'll Google it. So yeah, the Snyder question.
Or the previous observation about the definition of Levin in this book and this comparative approach.
On genocide.
Yes, genocide as the Holocaust because of the biological extermination and as in the Raphael Lemkin nation, destruction of the nation as in the United Nations definition. And for example, the Armenian Aget, that is an ethnocide or a massacre during the expulsion of the territories, and that is ethnic cleansing. And so if it's so because of the uniqueness.
Well, again, right? So the whole issue of uniqueness has got dimensions that are unique, that are exaggerated. Now, there are interesting things in Levin's book, and he also speaks about extraordinary aspects, right? But he tackles the whole issue from the perspective of genocide, right? So it is the physical extermination, right? And even in this respect, there are certain special dimensions to the murder of the Jews. But what I wanted to emphasize, and I hope I could convey this message rightly, that there is another dimension, that the Jews are not just first of all, and I didn't relate to that too much in the lecture itself, but the Jews on the eve of the Nazi period cannot be defined simply as a nation in the terms that Lemkin had in mind, right? Lemkin was a Polish Jew, so he thought in terms of the Jews in Poland. But Jews were scattered all over Europe. Many of them didn't perceive themselves as Jews, right? Or only as a religion. We have liberal Jewry and so on. And that differs from other cases of genocide where you have a fight over territory, right? Or domination of the territory, and in the case of the Armenians, the Turks want to take revenge for the idea of revolt and establishing an independent state, and so there is I would say a real battle over something, right? Also in Rwanda, right? There was between two groups on a certain territory. Here it's beyond the territory. It is a global issue, and so even on this level of the extermination of the physical Jew, there is a difference. But what I wanted to add is that what they had in mind, actually, the Nazis had in mind, and it's not only Hitler, it is a higher goal of a total exercising of what they call the Jewish spirit. And therefore, in my interpretation, the genocide of the Jews is part of the Holocaust, but is not identical with the Holocaust. So there is a chapter of murder in the Holocaust, but the Holocaust as such as an event, or any other term, Shoah, or X, or Y, whatever we will call it, the event as such, if we try to understand it, has broader dimensions than the act of the murder. The act of murder was essential, right? But next to that, they also wanted to exercise this influence of the Jews on art, on literature, on legal thinking, on the language as we saw. So this is much broader, and that is actually as I perceive the Holocaust, and therefore I agree with part of the things that Levine says, but he is missing, together with other genocide scholars, this dimension, which is a more spiritual dimension.
Thank you. So on that note, we have to wrap it up now. So on behalf of everybody, thank you very much for a very